So welcome, David Mills, to this conversation, which is really about the Dare to Lead program. And of course, you and I have known each other for a long time. I think we actually learnt to fly together. Well, not fly together, but we learnt to fly about the same time.
We did, Phil, and always good to see you. And thanks for having me along.
Yeah, so this is a conversation about the Dare to Lead program that you recently attended. So we're going to get into that in a moment. But first of all, I know what you do, but for the people watching, tell us a bit about your role.
As you know, Phil, I currently work for Qantas Airways. I'm a pilot on the Airbus A330 aircraft and also work in their flight operations safety auditing area.
So how long have you been a pilot?
My first flying lesson was back in 1984, Phil, so it's been a while.
I'm amazed you can remember that.
Yes, that's why we have logbooks, so I can record these momentous occasions. But in the Qantas group now since 1996.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And I know you've had a mixture of domestic and international flying as well. What do you like or hate about either of those?
Probably the worst thing about international flying is the time zone changes and the long flights. It plays havoc with your body clock, and you're perpetually tired, basically. But the flip side of that is you get to see some great places. So everything has its ups and its downs. So
yeah, and you also have, you've been interested in safety for a long time, and in fact, you and I have in the early days ran some programs around kind of the team dynamic that exists in the cockpit and how you might take that into corporate. But would you mind just really briefly explaining, that safety aspect you have as well?
Yeah, look, something that came to the forefront in aviation several decades ago was when they started investigating a lot of the accidents that were occurring. They discovered through cockpit voice recording tapes and things like that one of the main issues that was causing these issues was that there was a poor communication style in the flight deck. I think it was a bit of a leftover from the war era when commercial airlines really started expanding and recruiting people. A lot of the people that came in were from a military background, so they sort of brought that military style, authoritarian what they call a cockpit gradient. There was, the captain was sort of God, and you didn't really question him. So that was causing quite a few, not so much on its own, but it was a factor in accidents. That lack of communication and poor leadership and a lack of teamwork. So over the years, a lot of work was done to develop programs within the aviation industry that addressed what they broadly termed human factors, which was how we can communicate better, have better leadership style, better teamwork, those sorts of things.
Right. Yeah, so it feels like all the things you described still happen in organisations today, right? So sometimes the manager has that kind of God complex and uses their authority inappropriately, and they're the knower, not the learner. They kind of pretend to have all the answers and what have you. So, and you also sit at the back of cockpit sometimes, in not a kind of a safety check, anonymous safety checking process, which I think is fascinating as well.
Yeah, what I do is, as part of the what they call the flight operations audit program, I observe other pilots in their daily operation, and it's a purely an observational role. There's no punitive action at the end of it. And all we're trying to do is gather data on how people are operating as a crew, how they manage the threats that come along on a daily basis, whether that be from the weather or air traffic control or other things that go on an everyday basis in airline operations. And from that, it's basically a safety check and a health check of how our processes and procedures are dealing with those everyday kind of threats. And at the end of that, we may or may not adjust what we do based on evidential data rather than just kind of guessing at what's going on in the flight deck. So.
Yeah, I think that's what aviation has done so well, isn't it, since the early days that you talked about. And I think NASA had some role in that in the early days, didn't they? But, that accountability, improving the communication skills and kind of reducing the cockpit gradient to make it a safer operation for everyone,
Yeah, certainly the spotlight came onto aviation because obviously, aircraft accidents are quite high profile accidents. unfortunately normally result in quite a number of deaths. Obviously the loss of very expensive equipment. So there was a big push to try and eradicate any cause of an accident. So once the spotlight sort of came on the human factor side of it, a lot of work was done to eradicate that.
So people might be wondering, why the heck aren't we talking about Dare to Lead? So let's move on to Dare to Lead now, but hopefully we'll make the link to what you do, and it's so important in terms of leadership and some of the things we covered in Dare to Lead, but we'll just leave that aside for the moment. So yeah, why'd you do the program?
Look, well, as you know, we used to run some programs together, as you mentioned, in the past. I've always been interested in bringing that aviation style of leadership and teamwork into other environments. I'm not sure how I really became aware of Brené to start with. I think I might have seen one of her talks on TED or YouTube. And then, became aware that the leadership sphere was running programs along those lines. And I'm always open to improving my skills and knowledge when it comes to these things. So I signed up for the program.
Yeah. So, what was your experience of it? I mean, what were some of your key takeaways from the program?
Look, I think
it's a personal journey, isn't it? In many respects.
Well, for me, I think it was more that personal aspect that I took away from it. Obviously, I think it came probably session 2 or 3. I realised really that a lot of the stuff that Brené talks about in relation to, open leadership and being open to having other people input into your decision making and all that sort of thing. It's really what we've been doing in aviation for quite a number of years now. And for me, I couldn't really see immediately the link between what she was saying and what I did, because what we do in aviation is quite prescriptive. Obviously, we're bound by checklists and certain procedures to do with the aircraft. It's quite technical in a lot of aspects, whereas a lot of what she talks about in the program is to do with the corporate environment, team meetings, working with people where their personality types and have to deal with the different personality types. Whereas for me, in my environment, I get to work with different people every day. So I sort of was struggling at first to see how what she was saying would really apply to my environment. And then I sort of realised that I was actually getting more out of it on a personal level than I was on a work-related level. She makes you reflect on yourself and how you approach certain things in life and how you approach other people, conversations, difficult situations, all those sorts of things. And I really found that I probably got more out of it on a personal level and actually being able to take her methodology, if you like, and apply that into the work environment. But I could certainly see that I had some work to do on the personal side of things.
And I think aviation might be slightly different in that respect, because as you say, it's quite a prescriptive environment. There's checklists and checklists for the checklist, right? There's redundancy systems systems built in, backup systems and what have you. Because as you know, one of the key theories of Dare to Lead is that who we are is how we lead. And so, intrinsic in that is that it's a personal journey within a work context. So as you know, all of the exercises really relate back to work, basically, don't they? And many people also report that it's just as relevant for my family or my friend group, for example, because the same principles apply around trust, resilience, being able to have hard conversations, all of the things we know that actually foster good working relationships, whether they be at home or at work.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, going through those exercises that you do in the course, a lot of it was personal reflection. And, I get to this stage in life and I've had plenty of ups and downs, as have most people. And you look back and maybe you apply some of the things that she talks about and you can see how you've maybe over the years come up with entrenched kind of ways of dealing with things. And her program was good at that. Making you look at maybe alternative ways to deal with certain situations. And I think we all default to our comfort zone, but often the comfort zone doesn't lead to the best outcome. So for me, being pushed out of the comfort zone was good. And I can see that now what she's saying is of great benefit once you actually willing to step out of that comfort zone.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? A lot of people, you know, the number of people who come on the course and they say, oh, you know, I've watched Brené Brown and I've read her books, and, you know, sometimes people come on the course thinking they're not going to learn anything. But what most people report is, because of the way we've structured the course and the container, you know, the hub, you know, the app that comes with it, and all the things we do, people go, I've actually been able to operationalize this now, you know. So yes, I'm out of my comfort zone, but I'm actually now making practical, tangible changes to how, you know, I engage with people, or how I give feedback, or how I show up with my partner, which is fantastic. So what kind of practical, you know, question without notice, practical changes have you made, or what have you noticed different about how you relate to people or engage with people?
Look, I think probably one of the main things for me was I realised that probably, and I think a lot of people that I spoke to on the course were the same, that they perhaps had that perspective that they were maybe getting into that imposter syndrome, where you kind of feel like, you know, should I really be here? Like, I'm waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and go, you know, it's time to move on. You know, we finally found you out. And probably the other aspect too was just realising sort of what your automatic fallback position is. You know, if someone is perhaps coming at you with some constructive criticism, that I was probably already building defences and an argument in my defence. You know, rather than listening to what they're saying, I'm already trying to come up with ways mentally how I can defend myself and defend my position. So rather than just taking the time to listen and having the full picture, so it was quite interesting. The exercises for me were quite challenging at times, because it does take a bit of self-reflection. But I think that's the beauty of the course, is that you're not just sitting there learning theory that maybe you can apply later on. It is actually engaging with your emotions and making yourself reflect and see how you actually do deal with even just everyday situations. We probably don't stop to think and do a critique of ourselves at the end of the day, in how we dealt with certain people or certain situations. And I think that's something for me that I've taken away, is it's probably worthwhile doing that bit of self-reflection, just engaging with your own internal voice and seeing how you're sort of viewing the situation, and how you're bringing your entrenched emotions into situations, and just falling back to your normal way of dealing with things, rather than actually bringing some new thoughts into how you deal with everyday things. So,
yeah,
brilliant. Certainly for me, very challenging, but very worthwhile. And I'd have to honestly say that at the start, I probably wasn't enjoying the push out of the comfort zone. I don't think anyone does, but certainly saw the benefit of it by the end of the program, that's for sure.
And what, I assume you found the same thing, but what people really get from the program as well is that sense of community. And you mentioned the conversations you have before and in the breakout rooms, because, you know, we're doing the virtual program as well as face-to-face, but the virtual program, particularly, you have those breakout rooms, and people report how rich and fantastic the conversations were in the sense of community as well within the group.
I think that was one of the best things about it, was that everyone's there for the same purpose. They all wanted to get something out of it. And for me, in the breakout rooms that I went to, I think probably at least 70 to 80% of the breakout conversations ended up veering towards that personal aspect, rather than people saying, oh, you know, I've got this situation at work and I can apply this to that. A lot of people were basically going to that personal side of things and seeing the benefit to what we were discussing in their personal lives rather than their professional lives. So, very worthwhile for everybody in all aspects.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think the other thing that people talk about is being then able to translate those personal conversations into practical. So I think the course is, I hope you agree, the course is very rich with practical tools. So rumbling starters, rumbling tools, giving feedback, building trust, being able to show up in a kind of more vulnerable way rather than being armored up. So it sounds like you've got some really practical stuff from the course as well, which is great.
Absolutely, and I can tell you from my work life in the cockpit that having that openness, that trust, that ability to share in a non-punitive environment, it's what makes things work. Everyone knows that there's no such thing as a stupid question. Everyone's happy to have an input. Everyone's happy to receive input. Research has shown over the years that it doesn't matter how much experience you've got, how well trained you are. Human beings are human beings, and they make mistakes. They may not hear something, they may not see something. So having that environment where, as you say, people aren't armoured up, they're open to input. It's just a great way to work, and I think Brené really captures that in her skill set as well. Talking about the rumbling and the vulnerability and things like clear is kind. These are all things that we've been embracing for a few decades now in aviation, and the results speak for themselves. Accident rates have massively dropped over the years. So it's we're all just human beings, and there's always a good way and a bad way to interact with other human beings.
Because I know, that's really great point that you articulate there. We don't have to hear, the whole case study, but I know you've shared with me previously about that example of the captain who was coming in way too fast. And I know this is years ago now, because I know aviation's way ahead of the game. I think corporate Australia and around the world have, some things to learn. Not from every airline, probably. I'm sure there's some airlines you wouldn't fly with, but the best airlines like a Qantas that has an excellent safety record. But do you want to briefly share that story about the captain who was coming in too hot and just wasn't listening to feedback?
Yeah, look, I remember this case because it was one of the cases I studied when I first started doing professional studies on aviation safety, and it was an airliner that was going into a place called Ketchikan in Alaska, and it was back in the 70s. So the whole, as they call it, crew resource management philosophy hadn't really started then, so people were still sort of operating in this high gradient cockpit environment. And this aircraft,
like many organisations today.
Yeah, exactly. And the aircraft was coming in quite fast to this airport, and it was probably a little bit too high for for where it was on the approach. It should have been a little lower, a bit slower. And the first officer said to the captain, he was trying to be diplomatic, I guess. He said, do you always fly the approach this fast, Captain? And the captain turned to the flight engineer who was sitting behind the first officer and said, Hank, you know what the difference is between a first officer and a bird? And the flight engineer said, no, I don't, Captain. What is it? And the captain said, a bird knows how to fly. So, that kind of arrogance and attitude. I wouldn't say it was overly common, but it wasn't uncommon at times in certain environments, and completely belittling the skill set of the first officer. Not even attempting to address his concerns. You couldn't really shut down a person in a worse way than what had just occurred. And of course, if you do that sort of thing, then people are reluctant to speak up and want to help you because you've just basically insulted them. So anyway, to cut a long story short, the aircraft was too high, was too fast, remained that way throughout the approach, ended up landing quite a long way down the runway and ended up running off the end of the runway. So, those sorts of things, could have been avoided completely if the captain had just been a bit more vulnerable, a bit less armoured. So they got, you know what, you're right. I think we can just do a go around and have another attempt at the approach. But the arrogance and the unwillingness to listen to input, it ended up in an accident. So and
you also shared. So the last thing that was heard on the black box was what?
Well, it was the first officer saying to the captain, "I told you." I told you, but
and then they were all killed. I think, was that correct?
Yeah, the aircraft was destroyed and there were deaths. You know, so it wasn't a great outcome, and it could have been completely avoided. But unfortunately, due to the way the captain had decided to operate and his attitude towards receiving input, you know, it unfortunately ended up in an ugly situation.
So I think the reason I wanted you to tell that story is because it's just so applicable to organisations today, and unfortunately, you know, we still have the metaphorical captain, many captains in organisations who maybe want to demonstrate that they know stuff, and they don't listen, they don't take feedback on, they don't create a safe environment for people to challenge them. I've been doing this for 2.5 decades, and I think organisations have got a long way to go to be able to reach a place that, you know, the aspiration of the Daring Leadership book from Brené and the course that we run on her behalf is to create safe organisations where people can be themselves and be their best, and that's the aspiration.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, obviously, in a corporate situation, hundreds of people may not die because of a poor decision, but by the same token, a poor decision could lead to a poor outcome that costs the company hundreds of millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
Or ends up in a lawsuit. So there's always things that can go wrong through poor leadership and an unwillingness to be open to input, and realising that, you know, not one person has all the answers. It's and it doesn't need to be. And we say this in aviation. It's not leadership by committee. You know, there's always someone at the end of the day that has to make a decision, but it's about gathering as many inputs into that decision as you can to make a valid decision. And I think that's as valid outside the flight deck as it is inside the flight deck. So
fantastic. Hey, so I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been absolutely brilliant. I love the connection between, one of the reasons why I wanted to have a conversation with you, the connection between aviation, which obviously I still have a passion for, and organisations and the Dare to Lead program and how that all fits together. So I only have one more question for you, is when are we going flying?
Well, mate, as soon as the coronavirus lockdown is well behind us and we're actually allowed outside the lounge room, you can guarantee you'll be the first passenger I take up when we can get back in the sky, mate.
Let's go and put some of those Dare to Lead principles into action, eh?
Absolutely. And we might even have a beer afterwards.
Awesome, Dave. Thanks so much, mate.
Always great to see you, Phil. Thanks very much.
Take care. Bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.